We are going to host a panel discussion today, and it's going to kind of take part in several different parts. The first part is I'm going to allow each of the panelists to briefly talk 3 to 5 minutes on a subject as it relates to forest management. So you can the purpose of this is to kind of get to hear them speak, get a little knowledge about forest management practices and services they provide. And then following their talks, we'll transition into a Q&A session where I have some questions that I'm personally going to ask them, where I'm going to kind of take you through questions about what a consulting forester does, kind of the services they provide, kind of get into how do you find a consulting forester, and then transition into, once you have a consulting forester, kind of what to expect on both ends, from the landowner as well as from the consulting side. And then we'll talk a little bit more about forest management, more particular, before finishing up towards the end. We'll save the last 5 or 10 minutes to open it up to the floor for questions for our panelists. Okay? So with that being said, the first part, we'll start with John Ingram from Ingram Forestry. He's going to talk about regeneration after the harvest, particularly what needs to be done.
For regeneration, one of the first things you need to consider is what am I going to have there afterwards? And part of that is you need to consider, before you ever cut the first tree, what do I want afterwards? Do you want pine stand? Do you want a pine hardwood stand? Do you want an all hardwood stand? Or you just, what are your objectives? Another thing you need to consider along those lines are, what are your objectives for the piece of property? Is this going to be a hunting property? Is this just going to be something that you want to use for aesthetics or recreation? Is this going to be income? Is it going to be my house site? Or just what is this property going to be? All these have considerations that you need to take into account before you regenerate anything. Obviously, if you buy a piece that's cut over, somebody else has already pretty much said what you're going to be doing to some extent. When you regenerate, not only do you want to consider just everything of what I am going to be doing, but if you cut timber, you need to remember to set aside some money for reforestation. No matter what you do, if you use artificial, it's not going to be free. You need to consider if you want cost share money. And is it available for what fits your needs? So plan for the cost. Also, as you look at cost, be sure and think about what is the cost of money. If you're going to tie up $200 or $220 an acre for 18 to 20 years in a pine plantation, is this something I can afford to do? Will I get my investment back? So all these things you have to consider when you do that. One of the other things you need to look at is my land ready to reforest? As in, do I need fire lanes? Am I going to burn this land? Am I going to use chemicals of any kind for release or a site prep? All these things have ramifications and costs. If you're going to use hardwood, chances are you won't be planting because of the expense. One of the other things that you may want to consider on hardwood is, am I going to use sprouting? Some of the hardwood species, as we heard today, use seed. Sweet gum uses seed, it uses sprout. Poplar uses seeds. I think they can remain viable for 3+ years, very viable in the soil, so you can get poplar back very easily. But the oak, you may have to plan differently for. So all these things have to be considered if you're going to replant. You've got to know what the costs are. Species-wise, if you look at pine, what kind of pine do I want? Right now, there's a lot of incentive for longleaf pine. Is my site quality, or is my site acceptable for pine? Is my site better suited in a bottomland hardwood that gets wet? Is it better just to go with a hardwood stand? So all these things need to be considered before you ever take that first step. But it all goes back to what was there to begin with. You can structure timber cuts to meet your aesthetic needs. You can plan out leave areas for a house site, if that's what you want to have on there. If you want to pine trees wall to wall, that's easy enough accomplished. Most timber companies are tickled pink to give you a wall to wall pine stand site back. So all these things just need to be considered. Consider the fact that if you just want a partial stand, I've had some stands that we took and we used in hardwood sprouting, and we're also going back and planting on a wide spacing pine just so we can have a mix of pine and hardwood stand. I've had other clients that they just want all pines, period. So all these things do have a bearing on what you do for regeneration. Make it site specific for what you want and for what your needs are. And stop and think, what do I want 20 years down the road? Because the decisions you make today, you're going to be stuck with for a while. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Next on the panel will be John Havard of National Land Realty. He's going to talk about mid-rotation activities. John?
Well, mid-rotation activities is kind of a wide subject because it basically would be defined as anything after reforestation up to final harvest. So there's a lot that can go into that. One of the most important things to think of is, as John mentioned, you really need to plan ahead for what you are doing down the road. During a mid-rotation period, that's when, if you're going to grow hardwood, you need to think about species composition. If you've got a lot of privet or other invasive species and you don't take care of them before you do a final harvest, you're not going to get a stand of hardwood, you're going to get a stand of privet. And if it's not worth anything, it's not worth anything. So, invasive species control is very important if that's the kind of management you're doing. If you're managing for pines, a little less important because you're probably going to nuke the site after you clear cut and replant. Burning, mid-rotation burning, road maintenance, boundary line maintenance, all these things are very important depending on your objectives as a landowner. So, as he said, you need to know what you want and you need to have a plan for how to get there. I think somebody's going to talk about having a management plan here in just a minute, and that'll be a good way to keep you on track to accomplish your final goals. In a perfect world, money's not an object, and you can do what needs to be done as it needs to be done. In reality, a lot of people need a little bit of money coming in so they can pay for some of this stuff. So another mid-rotation activity would be a thinning. Could be for timber stand improvement if you're managing for hardwoods. It could just be a mid-rotation thinning for pine where you would cut, every fifth row and thin in between. Timing that along with, say, road maintenance is probably a good idea because you're going to have some road maintenance work after a logging operation. Set aside that money and keep it for other, herbicide work. Boundary line maintenance is fairly cheap, but it's also very important because surveys are expensive, and after about 3 or 4 years, that flagging is gone. So I would spend a few dollars a mile and keep your boundary lines painted if you've ever had a survey. If you haven't, and you ever do get surveyed, I would paint them the next day. That's about what I've got. It's mid-rotation is all about planning for the next move, which would be your final harvest.
Thank you, John. And as he's talking about forest management and planning, Mr. Joe Rigsby is going to speak about that. I think first, before we get to that, though, I'll let Mr. Billy Wright speak about kind of talking about the harvest and planning to do with conducting a sale.
All right, I appreciate that, Adam. One of the services that we provide most often, and probably one of the most important services we provide to private landowners is the coordination of a timber sale. You can spend decades and thousands of dollars preparing your investment and blow it if your sale is not handled properly. What I tell most landowners, and my clients that I work with are predominantly private landowners such as yourself, is that there's 3 reasons that you need to use a consultant, whether it's me or someone else. You need to have someone that is your agent to represent your best interest and have your best interest in mind when you market your timber. But those 3 reasons for using a consultant, I call them the 3 Ps. Number 1 is price. That's the number 1 reason landowners employ a consultant forester who works for a fee. But the number 1 reason landowners hire a forester is so that they'll get a higher price. We usually do that by making a competitive bid. That way you know you get the best price for it. We've had over 1,200 sales in our last 23 years, and when a landowner has made an attempt to market their timber themselves and then turned it over to us, we've averaged getting them 56% more than they were able to get on their own. Now, I can't guarantee you 56%, but I can tell you that our 23 average is 56%. We've had a few in there, we've tripled what they were able to get on their own. So the number 1 reason private landowners need a consultant is that your lack of knowledge in this particular area may hurt you. Average private landowner is going to sell 2-3 times in their lifetime. They're selling to a guy that buys it that many times a day. It's not necessarily that those guys are crooks. Most of them are not. Most of them are good, hard-working, honest people. But to get the most for your timber, I do believe you need to make it competitive, and you need to hire somebody that'll help level that playing field. So number 1 is price. Number 2 is protection. A consultant's going to help write a contract from your perspective that at least makes an attempt to make sure that your interests are protected in that contract. Not written from the timber buyer's perspective, written from yours. Now, it has to be fair. You can write enough protection in your contract to make sure that you have 0 risk. But the reality is a timber buyer is not going to sign it. So there has to be some give and take. But we have a contract that's been tested, as we said, over 1,200 times. We've had attorneys to review them. It's not perfect. You're going to have some problems more than likely during the harvesting process. But what a good, well-written contract will do, we will mitigate or lessen those opportunities for those problems. Another thing we do for protection is we hold a performance bond. So we normally hold 5% of whatever the purchase price is. We hold that in escrow, and if the buyer has lived up to that contract at the end of that harvesting, they get their money back. So that's another element to the timber sale process. And the third thing, I just call it peace of mind. You know, you guys are busy, you got your life to live, you just turn it over to somebody who has your best interest in mind, who has all of the licenses and all of the educational and experience requirements that you need, and so that you can go about your work knowing that your timber sale is taken care of. So price protection and peace of mind. And so that's the most important service I feel like that our company offers to private landowners.
Thank you, Billy. Kind of wrap it and tie it all together, talking about forest management and planning. Mr. Rigsby.
Thank you. If I seem unprepared, it's because I am. I was only given this assignment a couple of hours ago.
Mr. Rigsby we're very fortunate that he agreed to do this. He was the last minute fill-in. One of the other consulting foresters that were on the panel came ill, so we very much appreciate you stepping up to
I'd say more
take it easy on him, please.
but I'm aware that even in a forestry group, there's going to be a large percentage of Alabama fans. Am I right? 50 years ago, I was a young mortgage loan representative working for a big insurance company, traveling in West Alabama. I lived in Selma at the time. I worked for a travel insurance company making farm loans. And I met this old man over in Sumter County, and he found out I went to school at Auburn. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Son, Auburn is a wonderful school. They teach you young fellows how to manage these farms and timber tracts. And they did them all as child. You young fellows are well qualified to do that kind of work. Now, at the university, they teach us how to own these farms." That's about my only Auburn, Alabama. I was assigned to talk about management plans. The most important part of a management plan is an inventory, what we commonly call a timber cruise. You need to know what you've got before you can decide what to do with it. And that is usually the first step in any management plan to get a good timber inventory. So from there on, you can make intelligent decisions about when or even if you're going to cut timber or not, if you're going to plant trees or not, all the other things that have to be taken into consideration over the life of the forest. And usually when we talk about the life of the forest, we're talking about a rotation, which can be anywhere from 20 years to 50 years in the south. So, and of course, that is highly dependent on what species you have, what species you want. It's very expensive to change species, and it's nearly always beneficial to work with whatever nature has given you. And over time, if you want to, you can begin to make changes and improve fan composition and species mix and make more money in the end, which is what we're all after. So I'm better at answering questions than I am in speaking in contemporaneously. So anybody wants to ask a question, I'll do what I can.
I'm about to. Thank you, Mr. Rigsby. Appreciate that. So that kind of concludes the first part of the panel discussion, really getting to hear them speak, talk about forestry management a little bit, and the practices that go into that, and they really stress planning. This next part, I have a series of questions I'm going to ask them. Kind of the format that we're going to use is I'm going to let each of them have a turn to have first, go at answering the question, and then kind of open it up to the panel for all their feedback on, if they have a different spin on an answer or towards a question. The first part that we're going to start with is kind of what they've touched on a little bit already, Billy as well as Joe, is really what a consulting forester is and the services they provide. And with that, we'll let Mr. John Ingram take first go with that.
The services that I as a consultant can provide you are expertise, and as Billy said, you probably will sell timber typically 2 or 3 times in your lifetime, and you are going up against a timber buyer. I'm looking at one in particular. He buys timber every day for a living. There's an old saying my dad taught me, and that is, don't go play the other man's game because he's going to win. Not that he's a crook, but he is paid by his company to get the best deal. So a consultant tends to look after your interest in a timber sale. He can help you plan for what that timber sale will be. He can help you plan for what, as I said earlier, the regeneration will be. He can be your advisor all the way through the process.
Thank you, John.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely.
I just happened to think about that as John said something to keep my memory. I also have a real estate license, and one of the requirements to be an agent of someone is, they used to call it the co-out. Are any of you guys familiar with that? You have to have confidentiality, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, and accountability. And so, those are all services that we as consultants provide for landowners as your agent for whatever process or step you're working on.
Thank you. Anybody else like to?
I'll just add that, the term agent is, as he was saying, is very important, because a consultant is your agent. And I know he said that, but that means you have hired him to fight for you. He's not fighting for him. He's not fighting for the other guy. He's not trying to put a deal together despite what you want. It's our job to get you what you want, or not. Does that make sense? It's a fiduciary relationship, going back to that. We're not doing our job if we're not getting your best interest at heart.
Question to the consultants, how's your fee structure on that? Do you you do a percentage, you do a retaining fee?
You're asking questions I'm about to ask.
Man,
My short answer is yes. I don't want to jump ahead of these guys, but we really, it's a situation by situation. We do work with, we actually have 4 levels of service that we provide. I'm sure it's similar with the other guys, and if it varies, they can share with you. But we have, our top level is our care program, where our landowners pay us to come out biannually and inspect their property, and they get certain discounts. They receive top priority for their request of service, and there is an annual fee associated with that. There's a retainer fee, just like an attorney or an accountant. If you have them on retainer, we're on call when you need us. There's an annual fee for that. There are our repeat customers. They're going to receive higher priority because we've worked with them in the past. And then there's just the over-the-counter, the first-timers or the one-timers. We'll try to work them in the best we can. We're going to provide the same service for all of them, but it's just that the request for services will be based on their level of input. Now, timber sales and pine thinning, our company works on a commission basis.
Now, what we'll do, we'll go ahead and transition into that, and kind of let each of the panelists speak as far as when you hire a consulting forester, you know, what are the terms and how do they get paid? And whether it's all on a contractual basis or different means like Mr. Billy Wright was speaking about. So since we already have that brought to the table, anybody else in the panel would like to speak or add to Mr. Rice?
the majority of my income comes from commissions on timber sales and land sales. I also do various other things under contracts like regeneration or site prep, spraying, that kind of thing, by the job, quoted by the job. And I promise my clients, you will never be surprised by me. You'll never get a bill for something you did not expect. So, they like that.
One thing that consultants do, everything is not a timber sale as such. We talked about management plans. Unless someone else is paying for your management plan, that management plan does cost money, and that is usually done on an item basis. Some things I personally do are on a per day rate basis. They can be on an hourly basis plus whatever mileage or expenses. For anything typically not associated with, land sale, your consultant may burn your property at X dollars per acre. He may do chemical work or arrange it done for you. He may have the planting arranged for you, and that is usually done on a per acre basis. And that's typical of a lot of timber cruises. Boundary line paintings are typically done by the mile. So talk with whatever consultant that you want to, and just get an idea of what he charges specifically. When he looks at your property, or looks at a map of your property, he will have a lot better idea to advise you what he can charge you or not charge you for. I mean, each of us can sit up here and say, we'll charge you X dollars across the board, but you better look at the property before you say what the costs are going to be. So it's very important for both of you to look at that together.
What would you say the range is on those fees?
That's negotiable all the way across the board.
Let's hold questions. I'm gonna open it up at the end and give y'all each about 5 or 10 minutes there at the end. I'll ask questions to the panelists. I kind of want to keep going, keep the momentum going with the structure first. So moving on, besides at the AFOA annual meetings, how do you come in contact with most of your clients? How do you advertise? How do they find you? Is there a certain place that you recommend them searching for a consulting forester in their area? Maybe the Forestry Commission has a list. What's your take on that? And I'll start with Mr. Havard.
Well, the AFOA does have a list of consulting foresters. That would be a good place to start. I think the Alabama Board of Registration for Foresters maintains a list of registered foresters, but not necessarily consultants. Don't confuse registered forester with consultant, because a lot of timber buyers are registered foresters, most of them. I don't have anything against timber buyers. A lot of them manage property and a lot of them do a fine job at it. But the whole point of what we're talking about is a timber buyer is not your agent. A timber buyer has another motive behind what they're doing. Consulting forester is a third party. Like we said, your agent that works for you, is not answering to anybody at the sawmill. Our motivations are strictly what your goals are. You can do internet searches and find consulting firms around your area. Ask around if you know other landowners that work with somebody. The internet has become more and more useful, and it's not going to stop being more useful. And I think as time goes on, that's probably going to be the main source of all information, not just most information. So I wouldn't discount a Google search. Anybody add anything to that?
Is there anything that you'd recommend as far as being comfortable with hiring a consulting forester?
Excuse me, but we can't hear when you're asking the
You
questions.
can't hear me talking?
Not very well, no.
Okay, sorry about that. What I was saying was, kind of to add to that, you know, when you find a consulting forester, is there anything the panel can add as far as what a landowner should look for in hiring a consulting forester? Whether it's, you know, what are the important attributes to look for? Whether it's communication, reliability, certification, along those lines. If anybody on the panel would like to add on to that.
This is backing up just a little bit, but the AFOA has an agreement with the Association of Consulting Foresters that a new member is given an opportunity to request a meeting with an ACF member who is a consultant forester, of course, and we customarily give a half a day with no charge for any new AFO member that wants that service. And I have gotten a number of pretty good clients, but definitely, Bill probably has them.
I have, and I appreciate Joe bringing that up. You know, the Alabama chapter of the Association of Consulting Foresters has a website. You can pull up those foresters, you can see where they're based out of so that you can decide which consultant to work with. I'm not necessarily making a plug for my company, but I will for our association. The reason I recommend landowners use a member of the Association of Consulting Foresters is to be a member of that organization, you cannot buy timber. So you avoid that potential for conflict of interest. You're strictly a seller or listing agent if you're a member of the ACF. So go to that website, look up for a forester that's in your area, ask for, you know, just like anybody else you're going to interview, ask for references and referrals and things like that.
Billy, I'll come right back to you with this question. Once a landowner decides to hire a consulting forester, what should landowners do or have prepared before meeting with a consulting forester to help them?
That's an excellent question, and I'm probably going to give you the same answer that almost every forester that you've heard speak. The number one thing you need to do is know what you want. And then what we foresters will do, we'll look at what you got, and then hopefully we can prescribe a course on how you can achieve what you want to have. And so number one is know what you want. We'll look at what you got, give you an idea as to whether or not those are realistic objectives.
Thank you. Anybody else on the panel like to add to that question?
I'm a real estate broker, and over the years, I've had people looking for property, and I'll say, what do you want? Well, I want some good timber, I want a pond, I want a live stream, I want a nice hilltop, build my cottage, on and on. Well, you don't ever find all of that on any one property. And I say, find what you can afford and make it what you want it to be. And over time, you can achieve that objective.
Very good. Mr. Ingram, as a consulting forester, what do you expect from the landowner that you're hired to work for, and as far as having stuff prepared for you? We talked about kind of what you want to have prepared before you start to speak about objectives possibly, or the plan. But during that relationship, kind of the back and forth. So what should a landowner expect from you once you're hired on, and what do you expect in return from the landowner?
Well, the the first things typically when I have a landowner call a new one, somebody says, hey, I want you to come look at my land. First thing that I will ask for is, do you have a map, legal description of your property? And then when I meet with them, I'll prefer the first time, I like to meet with them on site no matter what, on the property, and I like to listen to what their needs are. I think as a consultant, we have to listen to what the needs are because it goes back to what do you want for this piece of property? As Joe said, you might not find the perfect property, you might not even own the perfect property, but if you want to try to turn it into something, you've got to know where you want to go. And I will have that discussion with you. One of the questions that I initially asked people also is, where do you see yourself in relationship to this property 10 years from now and 20 years from now? Stop and think, what do you want? So as we look at this together and we meet that first time, you need to share your objectives of what you want, whether it's income or whether it's, I just want this for a hunting property. I want it the best it can be. We can help you accomplish that, but we've got to know what that is. Sometimes consultants, not trying to be nosy, they will ask you personal questions. They're not trying to pry into your family life, but if we don't know what your needs are, you may need $100,000 by the end of the month. If you don't convey that to us, we're not going to take that into consideration. I mean, you've got to let us know what you want along the way so we can do our planning to help you get there.
Thank you. Anybody want to add to that before we continue on? Kind of related to the last question there, speaking about having a plan and working with a consulting forester to implement some of those management practices. How do those practices get done? Is it something that you contract out? Is it something you or your team, or maybe your company does itself? Kind of how does that work as far as actually getting the work, getting the management practices accomplished and completed? Start with Mr. Havard.
I would say that the answer to that question is going to change based on who you ask. Every single one of us will probably have a little bit different answer. Some guys are a one-man show and they might not be comfortable burning 100 acres by themselves on a hot summer day. Maybe you may not be equipped for tree planting or herbicide work. So a lot of activities are probably at least have a chance of being contracted out to third party. Most equipment, things like that. Logging is always going to be contracted out. So the short answer is it depends on what, how big the company you're working with is, what they're comfortable doing by themselves, how much help they have, and do they have access to help temporarily. And do they have a good contractor that specializes in the types of activities that you want to do that, I could do it myself, but we can pay this guy the same amount you would pay me to do it, and he'll do a better job. Situations like that, you're going to get a referral and not do it myself. And as far as another aspect of that goes, it really it depends on how involved you are as a landowner if it's going to be contracted out, whether the consultant handles it for you or whether you want to handle it yourself.
That was the question I was getting to.
Any of us, I'm sure, would be happy to arrange and oversee and do all that for you, but if that's something you want to do, if you want to meet the bulldozer operator on your 100 acres to put in a new road or build a pond, and you want to be out there every day and watch him move the dirt around, that's fine. If you don't, we probably do that. 4 feet. Yeah, right.
Thank you for that answer. Is there any of the other panel members have anything to add to that, or is that pretty? Okay. So we've been talking about timber management quite a bit, management practices to do with that. Kind of outside generating income from timber, landowners may be interested in alternative ways to generate income or reduce costs. Do you provide assistance to landowners that are interested in alternative income opportunities such as hunting lease management, pine straw production, silvopasture, agroforestry, etc.? Do you like to take that one?
Oh, yeah, I do a lot of hunting leases. Sorry, I was distracted there by something, my mind slipped gear. Anyway, I do have a lot of hunting leases for myself and others, and if you read the ACF newsletter, you have probably seen in there where I and others are offering hunting leases. That's a good way to do it. And I have been astonished at how much money you can get for them if you just ask for it. You know, I constantly hear people complain, oh, I can get all I need from RMS for $10 an acre. Okay, go get all you want and leave me alone. Because I don't breed for $10 an acre. And what I like to do the most is get one ready and put it on the AFOA website and ask for the most money by a certain date. And you will get numerous calls and emails, and I've gotten as much as $45 an acre for a 1-year hunting lease. But you do have to make a little preparation. You have to get a little package ready to send out by email. You know, you can't possibly afford to go show it to anybody because there's just not that much money in it. But it's fun to do.
Having good hunting would help with that.
Hunting, yeah, it was good hunting. Yeah.
Any of the other services though, such as pine straw production or silvopasture operations, do y'all as a consulting forester, can y'all assist with those?
I had a client last year who had about 50 acres of planted trees, a lot of pine, which was 10 years old, pine straw a foot deep, and we couldn't get anything done with it. If you don't have longleaf pine, you can forget it. A lot of pine is just not marketable. So, but if you want to make money with pine straw, plant longleaf and be ready to get you some machinery and rake it, and there's big money in longleaf pine straw. About $10 a bale.
One thing I'd like to say about that is if you want some of these other alternative items for income, like pine straw, you can lease your land for horseback riding. You've got to plan for that in advance. If you want, just like pine straw production, you've got to have a clean understory. You have to plan well in advance. If you want horseback riding as a club to come use your property, you've got to have open trails and be kept open. And when you make timber cuts, they've got to be such that they don't destroy your trail system. I think each one of us would go back and say everything you do requires prior planning.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the board to ask questions. And kind of the end, my part of the question and answer, our approaches to forest management and management of other natural resources on our lands, they go through changes in terms of whether it's social, economic, or ecological, including both political and technological changes. How do consulting foresters keep up with these changes over time? And there's a lot of ways you can answer that question as far as whether you take the technological route or the political route. Anybody?
Once again, the short answer is yes. No, we all have to adapt. That's one thing that my business, I've been doing this now 23 years. It's nothing like it was when I first started. I have a drone, I have a smartphone with apps on it to show me property lines. You know, you have to adapt. That's just one of the things you have to do. You have to be plugged in politically. We've got some issues that if you're not plugged in, you're going to lose your markets, you're going to lose your rights for your private property. And so you have to be plugged in there and adapt to changing political and economic winds.
I don't have anything to add. I'm very good.
He's whispering it in my ear.
Fair enough. give a round of applause to our panelists. With that, I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions. We have about 5 or 6 minutes left. I'll take several questions if anybody would like to ask. Yes, sir.
What are the general costs per area in replanting? We've heard so much about that, so I'm just wanting to know what 1,000 acre, 200 an acre, I mean, loblolly, longleaf, government assistance. Somebody can address that.
I'll chime in on that. The short answer, like that we're so fond of, is it depends. You know, if you're gonna do artificial regeneration, there's a bottom basement price where you're not doing any site prep, you're just sticking trees in the ground cheap as you can get them. Probably more like, $75, $80 an acre, something like that for trees and labor. If you want to plant Cadillacs, you can plant Cadillacs and spend as much as you want. You can do mechanical site prep with chemicals and burning and the highest dollar trees you can get and spend as much money. You can spend as much or more money than it costs you to buy the land if you want to. But there's a happy medium in there, but it depends on what you want. Longleaf is more expensive because you pretty much have to plant containerized trees. They're heavier, they cost more to plant because they're heavier. They're a little bit finicky. You have to be careful with what chemicals you put on them. You're probably going to want to burn. Loblolly's cheap, and it's easier to do. But if it doesn't fit with your goals, then you might as well forget about it. So it depends.
One thing I'd like to say too is if you are interested in cost share, you need to go ahead as soon as your timber is cut and see if you can get signed up. There's a number of programs that state and federal government have. Each of them is different. Each of them has a different cost share. Each of them are species specific and land specific. So you just have to ask. I think each of us would say the question we hate the worst is somebody comes up to you and says, what's my timber worth in this county? I don't have a clue.
I was going to ask that.
You can't, there's an impossible question to ask. I realize you wanted an answer, but sometimes you've got to define a little bit more of what you want so we can give you an answer. We've got the more qualifications that have to be answered before we can give you some kind of answer.
I'll add just one more thing to that too. On cost share programs, y'all heard of the golden rule? He who owns the gold owns the rules, or makes the rules. That's how cost share programs are. If the government's giving you money to do something, they're going to expect you to do it their way. So if you're not prepared to do it their way, I would just be cautious about getting into that. Understand the requirements, understand what they want from you, the timelines and everything. You have to be willing to follow it to the letter, or either they're not going to get you the money or they're going to ask for it back. Just something to be aware of. They can be great if you want to follow those rules, but if you're planting longleaf and they only want you to plant on a 10 by 10 spacing, but you want to grow pine or rake pine straw, you might want to think again, because you probably need more trees per acre than that's going to give you to get a good crop of pine straw. There's a lot that goes into it, and it all depends on what your goals are, what you're willing to put up with, what kind of hassle there is, and how much money you have to spend.
I think one thing to take away from this is planning. It's important. Management, planning, having a plan. Going forward with it.
Here's one over here.
Okay, we have time for one more, possibly two quick questions.
This one is regarding what happens if you hire a forester and things go wrong. If you have boundary problems, you burn somebody's land, somebody gets hurt, things like that. What does RF
Y'all hear that? All right.
assist?
Dr. Alexander Snarl.
have an agreement or a contract between you and that consultant that states who's responsible for what. I know that we do, and then we also, when we market timber for the landowner, we have a timber sale contract between our client and the buyer that specifies who's responsible for what. So as Joe mentioned earlier, there's no surprises. It's good to have that in writing prior to that.
Yes, sir.
In the contract that you're talking about, I'm taking the perspective of a buyer. I'll tell the people out here that there's great differences in the quality of work that I see with both Suffolk and Suffolk Forestry. Now, there's two of them up there on both ends that I've dealt with, and I think they're doing a really good job. But there are other people that bought timber from, they're not even there during the sale or the close. I mean, it's, so I do think the landowners need to do a little bit, because is there anything in y'all's contract that says, hey, when Charles Edwards is out there starting to cut your timber, I'm gonna be there so many hours a week, just to make sure that everything's going on right?
We do. We don't have an hour figure, but we mentioned that we will guarantee one unannounced inspection per week for that very reason.
To follow up on that, I'd like to make a comment and get your panel's opinion. My wife and I have been through several timber sales. Almost always we've had her consultant forester oversee the sale. One thing, your consultant forester knows the buyers in the area, so you most likely will get a reputable timber buyer. The second thing, the consultant forester has skin in the game, because his consultant fee, he's not going to miss a load. Every load that goes to the public is accounted for. So I think that's another reason for using a consultant.
Well, add to that too is not missing a load also means merchandising properly. If you're on per unit sale, if it's a lump sum sale, you don't care what truck it goes on because they've already paid for it. But if it's a per unit sale, somebody needs to be out there pretty regularly and make sure the piles look right.
You lose a lot of dollars if you don't merchandise right.
It doesn't take long at all.
That's right.
All right, we are out of time. Let's give one more round of applause to our people. Rigsby for outstanding panel, and I appreciate their taking their time to